Hi, we come to the second temptation at the center of our passage here in Luke 4, 1-14, where Jesus and the devil discuss the question of the kingdoms of this world. As you can see on the right side of the screen, the chiasm in that left column, the column with the colors in it, with the green, red, and blue, we're on the C part at the center there. And so if you're not familiar with chiasm, I'd invite you to go back a couple of videos where I do the introduction to this whole unit and see where that goes. So this is at the very center of this, and there are so many things going on in these 4 verses that this could be a very long video, and I've edited out some of the things I might want to say to keep it within some bounds here. But first of all, just to get a feel for this, take a look for a moment at this short clip from the 1989 film Jesus of Montreal, which sets the context in the modern world for what we're going to be looking at here.
Vous avez jamais pensé à publier un livre?
Vous voulez dire un roman?
Ouais. Ou un livre de souvenirs. Vos voyages ou votre combat contre la drogue, l'alcool. N'importe quoi.
Je suis pas écrivain.
Je n'ai pas dit écrire un livre, j'ai dit publier. Non, des écrivains, c'est des maisons d'édition en nom qui sont disponibles. Talentueux et pauvres.
Évidemment.
Est-ce que je vous choque?
Non.
J'essaie juste de vous faire comprendre qu'avec le talent que vous avez, cette ville-là est à vous. Si vous voulez.
So if you haven't seen that film, I'd really encourage you to watch it. It still plays well 3 decades later. But what's, of course, at issue here is the question of power. And what power and what kind of power and at what cost is exactly what's at issue here. So a number of ways we're going to come at this. 2 scholars, Rudman and Furta. Here I'll show you the citations for their articles here from Dominic Rudman, Authority and Right of Disposal in Luke 4-6. And here Tucker Furta, God of the Nations, Daniel, Satan, and the Temptations in Luke. They both make arguments for the connections between these passages here in Luke 4, 5-8 and the book of Daniel, especially the court tales in the book of Daniel, not the apocalyptic passages about the human one, and we'll look at more of that later, and certainly in the book of Revelation. The book of Daniel is echoed there a number of times from the apocalyptic section from Daniel 7-12. But here are a number of other sections from the Nebuchadnezzar stories in the beginning. And if I just look at the parallels, you can see what's at issue here. So in Luke 4-5, we hear kingdoms, which is rare to see the plural, and here we see kingdoms here, and only one other time in Daniel. Then the question of the devil giving glory and authority, and here's King Nebuchadnezzar, who says it's been built by his glory and authority, a rare combination there. As the devil says he can give it to anyone he please, so Nebuchadnezzar says, into whose hand he has given human beings. I'm sorry, this is Daniel speaking. You, O king, to whom the God of heaven has given the kingdom, and the Most High is sovereign, he gives it to whom he will. So Daniel there is suggesting it's God who gives kingdoms, either to Nebuchadnezzar or to somebody else, as opposed to the devil claiming the power to do it here. The devil calls on Jesus to worship him, of course, not worship Wes, in exchange for the power over those kingdoms. And then Nebuchadnezzar threatens whoever does not fall and worship him shall be immediately thrown into the furnace of blazing fire. And of course, Jesus ends with worship your God, the Lord your God, and serve him only, which is from Deuteronomy. And so let's go back to our passage from our connections from Deuteronomy, which we looked at last time, first with the bread passage and here with the kingdoms passage. So here is the verse we were just looking at from 4, 5, and 6 in Luke, and here it is from Deuteronomy 34, where Moses went up to the plains of Moab, etc., and Yahweh said to him, "This is the land of which I swore to Abraham and to Isaac and to Jacob, saying, I will give it to your descendants." So the same kind of issue, other than a major difference. This is about giving land, and what the Nebuchadnezzar scene in Daniel is about giving authority over kingdoms, social orders. So there is a difference there, and that's going to be something important we're going to look at here. So that's one thing we want to look at as we go through this. And a couple of the points that Rudman and Furta make, we'll see as we go through the individual verses. So here's our structure. Another thing that I want to look at as we get started here is how the themes that we're looking at here echo throughout all of Luke. So you can see here this question of the kingdoms of the world, contrasting with the kingdom that will have no end, and the kingdom of God 31 times in Luke. And we're going to look at that some more later, but I want to draw attention to this here now as we start. The ones in red are the references to kingdoms other than God's kingdom. So the one we're looking at here, kings of this world, and then you see the many, many times kingdom of God throughout Luke. Then we hear here specifically the kingdom of Satan. Kingdom, if Satan is divided against himself, how will his kingdom stand? So here in 11, 17, and 18, and then here finally in in 19:12 to 15, not quite finally, penultimately here, is a really important one, because we'll come back to this one in a minute when we look at the question of Agrippa and Caligula and Tiberius in the background of the Luke passage here. Because Herod and Augustus are in the background of this passage here in chapter 19, which we'll get to later, which is to highlight the point that Luke, at least once here, if not twice, here in 19 and now in our passage in 4:5 to 8, chapter 4, verses 5 to 8, is using characters in the story, either the devil here or the characters in a parable in chapter 19, as a thinly veiled story about the events in the Roman world in Jesus' own time. So let's put the other one back up here, the chiasm, and we'll begin to go through some of the language and see what's going on here. So the devil led him up here using a slightly different word than the Spirit leading him into the wilderness, but it's also a gentle word. There's no force involved. He's just being led. So led him and showed him in an instant the kingdoms of this world. The word for show here, from the root duknami, is not the same as a revelatory word. It's not apocalypsis or apocalypto, the verb, in the sense of a divine revelation. It's simply a showing, and as you can see, 33 times in the New Testament. And as Marshall notes there, like a prospective seller, the devil points out all the kingdoms of the world in a brief moment, much like the publisher enticement in Jesus of Montreal that you saw. And again, in an instant, in a moment of time, a rare phrase there. But here's where we really want to focus, is all the kingdoms of the world, the basileus of the eukomene. And eukomene is an important word. It's only 3 times in Luke, once here back in 2:1, and let's look at it there, where it's in those days a decree went out from Emperor Augustus that all the world should be registered. And there it is there, eukomene. And then it's in 21:26 here, what is coming upon the eukomene here. So going back to our passage, one of the things at issue is, what does that word mean? It's not the same as cosmo or cosmos, which is the word translated for world in the Gospel of John. And the Gospel of John has more than 3/4 of all the uses of cosmos in the entire New Testament in that one gospel, and has a very specific meaning in the Gospel of John. Luke doesn't use cosmos in the way that John does, but eukomene is a very important word because it's the word the Roman Empire used to describe itself. It's very important here that it's not creation. It's not even simply the limited part of creation is the earth, as opposed to the sky and the stars and the moon, which of course are also part of creation, but the inhabited world. It's the world that Rome or Greek kingdoms would have looked at as the place where people live. So it's similar to what we might call civilization, in the sense that they would have seen it as within their world. So the eukomene is the world controlled by civilization, as opposed to the barbarian world outside that. So it's the inhabited world, but the world inhabited by civilization. So that's what we're seeing here, is it's not the power over creation, it's the power over civilization. And that's where I would take issue with Rudman in his piece, where he suggests that what the devil is offering is suggesting that God has given the power over creation. But eukomene is clearly not creation in Luke, Acts, or anywhere else. So it's the power over the inhabited world, over civilization, or what we might call the power over empire. And one of the questions that Rudman and Furta take opposite positions on is that when the devil says, the authority has been given to me, is he telling the truth or is he lying? Or is he thinking he's telling the truth, but in fact it's not true? Like, does he believe it's been given to him, but it hasn't really? Or does he know it hasn't, but he's claiming it is? Or has it? And of course that depends upon what we think God's relationship is with civilization. And I've been trying to show throughout, and I'll continue to show throughout not only this series, but the Genesis and Revelation series as well, if not the Samuel series that I'm working on now, that this is part of the great contrast, that the God that Jesus claims is the God who promotes the religion of creation and sees empire and all that as what needs to come down, the Babylon in Revelation's terms, or the kingdoms of people like Nimrod or the Tower of Babel in Genesis terms. And certainly we've seen that already in Luke several times around the 15th year of the reign of Emperor Tiberius, etc. So the contrast here is between the kingdom of God and the kingdoms of the world. And the devil may well have power over the kingdoms of the world, but as Jesus will have his disciples pray, your will be done, your kingdom come on earth as it is in the sky or in heaven. And on earth there is gay, G-E as we transliterate it, and not eukomene here. So Jesus does not ask people to pray that God's kingdom take over the ecumene, but over the earth. And so the ecumene is very much this place that Luke sees as part of the Roman world, of the imperial world more broadly, and very likely is controlled by the evil one or the devil, by whatever name. So the devil shows him all of these things, and then the devil says to him, I will give you their glory and all their authority, for it has been given over to me, and I give it to whomever I please. The glory of the kingdoms, of course, glory, doxa in Greek, kabod in Hebrew, originally from a word meaning reflective, like a shiny metal, something that reflects back light, ultimately like a mirror, something you can look in and see something. So the humans reflect the glory of God because we are the image and likeness of God. So in that sense, when you look at us, God is reflected back. If we are full of the Holy Spirit and our true self, as we might put it these days. So that's the glory here, the sense of the essence of these kingdoms that are reflective and shiny, that reflect back on their creator or their leader here. And their authority, for it has been given over to me. And notice that that's a phrase that's not in Mark's version of this. And so Jesus' answer, his condition is, if you then will worship me, it will all be yours. So the word for worship here, proskunese, is only a few times in Luke. Curiously, it's in these two verses, once from the devil and once from Jesus, and then here in 24:52 near the end, and the very second to last verse, where after the road to Emmaus and the return to Jerusalem, where they all gathered together and they worship Jesus and return to Jerusalem with great joy. So plainly, that's the right answer, and Jesus also has the right answer. It is written, worship the Lord your God and serve only him. As we already saw from Deuteronomy here, that is a quote here from 6:13. So what about this? What about this scene? What else can we make out of it? And this is where we get the connections here with the larger picture. And I'm going to expand out my PDF viewer here so we can see some other things that I can't quite see in the narrow view, and we don't need to see the text for now. This is from N.H. Taylor, The Temptation of Jesus on the Mountain, a Palestinian Christian polemic against Agrippa I. And what Taylor argues here is that in our story here, the devil plays the part of Caligula, and Jesus is presented with the part of Agrippa. And so to understand that, we have to understand something of the background of what's going on here. So jumping ahead later into Taylor's article, he notes that what is at issue here is the relationship between Roman power and the delegated power of the Herods in Roman Judea and the wider province there. So let's look at a couple things to help us understand what Taylor's point is. I've looked at this chart before. We looked at it early on to see who the various Herods were at the time of Jesus' birth and the infancy stories. Now we're moving on to down here to see this sequence. So we're talking about Herod Agrippa, king of Judea here, who began to rule under the reign of his friend and mentor Caligula, and Taylor notes that some of the story is told in Josephus here. So let's look at a little piece of these excerpts from Josephus' Jewish War. For those not familiar, Josephus was a member of the Jewish elite in Jerusalem, who after the revolt in the mid-60s that the Romans eventually came and repressed, including destroying the temple, sided with the Romans to protect himself and wrote up two major books to give the Romans an understanding of Jewish life. One is this one we're looking at here, Jewish War, which is sort of a play-by-play of the events leading up to the revolt and the destruction of the temple. And the other is his so-called Antiquities of the Jews, which is his attempt to basically write the biblical story in language that a Roman audience could make some sense of. So here we're seeing this, his writing this a little bit after the fact. But Josephus is not a Christian, and he's not on the side of the Jesus people, so he's fairly objective for our purpose here. So he says, in the meantime, Agrippa, the son of Aristobulus, who had been slain by his father Herod, came to Tiberias to accuse Herod the Tetrarch, who, not admitting of his accusation, he stayed at Rome and cultivated a friendship with others of the men of note, but principally with Caius, the son of Germanicus, which is to say Caligula. So while Tiberius was king, Tiberius understood Agrippa as a threat and so put him in jail. And when Caius, which would say Caligula, became Caesar, as you see down here in paragraph 6, he released Agrippa from his bonds and made him king of Philip's tetrarchy, who is now dead. And then what happened, which created the problem here, you see in the bottom now, Caius Caesar did so grossly abuse the fortune he had arrived at as to take himself to be a god and desire to be so called. He sent Petronius with an army to Jerusalem to place his statues in the temple. And as Taylor notes, the threatened desecration of the temple had incited not only an agricultural strike, but also mobilized wide-scale popular resistance in Judea and Galilee. Which is to say, when people heard that Caligula was going to put a statue of himself there, they went on strike. And the strike led to food shortages, and the food shortages led to popular resistance, and that affected tax revenues, which, of course, is the primary purpose of the delegated powers to preserve taxes. As Taylor goes on to say here, the inability to pay their taxes would have alienated many peasants from their land and led to an upsurge in banditry, as according to Josephus, the Herodian aristocracy had warned would be the case. Against this background must be seen Agrippa's need to establish order and stability to the satisfaction of his Roman overlords, but without antagonizing his Jewish subjects. And jumping down here, we hear, in other words, rather than suppress the movements that had arisen during the preceding crisis, Agrippa sought a less popular scapegoat and accordingly attacked the church instead. And so that's what we see in places like Acts 12. Which we'll go to for a second, where Luke maintains the language of King Herod to suggest it's one continuous opposition from the announcement of Jesus' birth all the way through the end. But we can know historically and from the chart I showed you that this refers to Agrippa. So we hear here is about that time King Herod laid violent hands upon some who belonged to the church. He had James, the brother of John, killed with the sword. And when he saw that it pleased the Jews, he proceeded to arrest Peter too. So what we're seeing there is that as Taylor points out, Agrippa is trying to play the church against the Jews, figuring that he needs the Jews to support his role there. And historically, his family is part Jewish anyway, as opposed to needing this new movement, which has no power and no authority, especially in those early days, so he can use them as a scapegoat. So what Taylor's suggesting out of this whole picture here is that Luke has contrived the story of the devil as a cipher for Caligula and Agrippa in terms of delegated power. In other words, it's like a little political satire on the world of the time, suggesting that Caligula is played by the devil. But of course, Jesus does not take that power. Whereas Agrippa did agree to worship the Caligula in the sense of worshiping the Roman Empire and the Roman gods and give his loyalty to them, Jesus refuses. He will not worship the devil. And as you look at it, when we see passages and throughout the rest of Luke, we see this theme coming up all the way through. So we see here especially, if you'll worship me, and the question at the beginning is at the beginning is serving Jesus or serving God without fear, and at the end they worship him. So the disciples and the early people in the infancy stories, Mary and Elizabeth and Zachariah and folks, understand what's at issue, and so does Jesus. In other words, Jesus had good parenting and good formation from his earthly parents and from his God Father, so to speak. God-Father, not Godfather, that's another series I'll do sometime. He understands to worship and serve God alone from Deuteronomy. And so that takes us through the second temptation, and we'll complete this journey with the third part of the chiasm, and we'll see something interesting there where Jesus again cites Deuteronomy 6, and we've seen Deuteronomy 8, but not Deuteronomy 7, and we'll take that up as we complete this next time. See you then. Bye-bye.